10 men in black suits surrounded her mother's grave. Sherry froze at the cemetery gates, discount flowers wilting in her grip. Diane Smith's plot, always empty except for her Sunday visits, was occupied. The Los Angeles skyline loomed in the distance under gray clouds, but all she could see was the wall of strangers blocking her path. Their tailored suits didn't belong on the worn grass. Their stance screamed danger. They weren't mourners. They weren't family. They were something else entirely. At the center stood a man she'd never seen before. Tall, muscular, tattooed from neck to knuckles, wearing a crisp white shirt that made his ink look darker. His hands rested on her mother's headstone like he owned it. Red roses lay across the granite, expensive, fresh, nothing like the cheap bouquet trembling in Sherry's grip. Her first thought was irrational, but immediate. They've come to collect on a debt even the dead can't pay. Hey. Her voice came out sharper than intended, but the maid uniform she still wore from her morning shift made her feel smaller than she wanted to sound. Get away from my mother's grave. Every head turned. The tattooed man was last to look up. When he did, his gaze hit her like something physical. Dark eyes, cold and assessing, studying her the way someone evaluates a problem that needs solving. Diane Smith's daughter. He knew her mother's name without reading the headstone. Sherry's blood went cold. Who the hell are you? Alfredo Marcello. The name landed like a fist to her chest. She'd seen it in news reports. Heard it whispered in the mansion where she cleaned rooms for people who never looked at her face. Your mother saved my life 8 years ago. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of calm that came from never being questioned. I've been paying her medical bills ever since. The funeral costs. This plot. Your rent. Everything. Sherry stopped breathing. The anonymous donor. The burial she couldn't afford on a maid's salary. The debt collectors who mysteriously stopped calling. The rent that somehow got paid when she came up short. It was him. All of it. Why? The word barely made it past her lips. Because I owed her. He stepped closer, and Sherry noticed the neck tattoo fully now. Dark, intricate, like a brand. But that's not why I'm here today. His eyes swept the cemetery perimeter, scanning the distant trees, the parked cars along the road. Someone else found this grave. Someone who's been watching you. What does that mean? It means you're no longer invisible, Miss Smith. His voice dropped lower, and the 10 men shifted, hands moving toward concealed weapons. It means they've already been inside the mansion where you work. Inside your basement room. And it means if you don't come with me right now, they'll find pieces of you scattered across LA before sunrise. The wind scattered loose petals across her mother's name carved in stone. 24 hours ago, her biggest problem was scrubbing toilets for a woman who couldn't remember her name. Now she was standing in a cemetery with the LA skyline watching, learning her dead mother had once saved a Mafia boss, and that single act of mercy had just painted a target on Sherry's back. She looked at the grave, at the 10 armed men, at the tattooed stranger who'd been silently paying her bills for 8 years while she cleaned other people's houses. Why should I trust you? Alfredo held her gaze, unflinching. Because your mother did. Sherry stayed where she was for 3 more heartbeats, staring into those dark eyes. The cemetery wind cut cold across her shoulders, but the cold inside her chest ran deeper. Her mother had trusted this man. Her mother had kept this secret buried for 8 years. Finally, she swallowed hard and nodded. Fine. I'll go with you. Alfredo didn't look relieved. Didn't look victorious. He only raised one tattooed hand, and the 10 men moved like a machine that had been waiting for the signal. Welcome back, my beautiful family. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for sticking with me. Your love and support mean everything. If you're excited for today's story and ready to soak it all in, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Tomorrow, I've got another captivating story lined up for you, and believe me, you won't want to miss it. Now, let us begin. The black SUV carved through familiar LA streets, but Sherry insisted on one stop first. The mansion. I need my things. Alfredo's jaw tightened. It's not safe. I don't care. I don't have anything except what's in that room. 10 minutes later, they pulled up to the servants' entrance. Two suited men went ahead. Two stayed behind. Sherry led them down the basement stairs she'd climbed every morning at 5 a.m. for 2 years, her small room at the end smelling like cheap detergent and loneliness. But when she opened the door, everything felt wrong. The drawer under her bed sat slightly open. Her mother's photo faced the wrong direction. The notebook where she practiced nursing terminology had been moved. Someone's been in here. Fury replaced fear in her voice. This was the only space in the world that was hers. Alfredo moved past her, walking straight to the electrical outlet near the bed. With swift precision, he pried off the plastic plate with a knife. Inside, nestled among the wires, sat a small black device. Listening device. Professional grade. Running for weeks, maybe longer. Sherry stared at the tiny object in his tattooed hand, throat closing. They'd heard everything. The nights she cried herself to sleep. The humiliating phone calls with bill collectors. Every private moment of her invisible life. Why would anyone do this to me? I'm nobody. Because they're looking for my weakness, Alfredo said quietly, and they think they've found it. His phone vibrated. He listened in complete silence, jaw tightening. They know you're here. We leave now. But my things. No time. His hand closed around her wrist, not rough, but absolutely final. Move. Outside, an engine roared. Sherry grabbed her mother's photo and ran. In the SUV, as tires screeched away from the only home she'd known, Alfredo finally spoke again. Your mother worked night shift in the ER 8 years ago. August 14th. His voice was measured, controlled, but something underneath suggested this story cost him to tell. I was brought in bleeding from 3 gunshot wounds. Maurizio Davide's assassination attempt. He'd bribed cops to finish the job at the hospital. Sherry pressed her mother's photo against her chest, listening. Diane saw them coming through the ER entrance, recognized their intent before they even drew weapons. She locked the trauma bay doors from inside, barricaded them. Alfredo's tattooed hands flexed on his knees. No anesthesia. No backup. Just her, 3 bullets in my chest, and corrupt cops trying to break through to kill us both. She never told me, Sherry whispered. She made me promise she wouldn't have to. Said keeping you ignorant was the only protection she could give you. His dark eyes met hers. Her exact words, let Sherry stay invisible. It's the only safety people like us ever get. The SUV climbed into the hills. Through the rear window, Sherry saw smoke rising from the direction they'd just left, dark plumes against the gray sky. What is that? Alfredo glanced back, expression unchanged. The mansion. Mauricio's men arrived 30 seconds after we left. They'll torch it rather than leave evidence. Sherry watched the only home she'd known burn in the rearview mirror. Her basement room. Her uniforms. Her community college brochures. Everything that proved Sherry Smith existed gone. Your former boss, Wendy Wilson, Alfredo continued. She's been reporting to Maurizio for 6 months. Your schedule, your routines, where you went on your days off. He paid her $50,000 for information about a maid she couldn't be bothered to remember the name of. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised her. Mrs. Wilson had never looked at her face, never asked how she was doing. To people like that, maids were furniture. But it still hurt. The cameras weren't just in your room, Alfredo added. The staff bathroom. The kitchen where you ate alone. Every space you occupied while being invisible to everyone else, Maurizio was watching. Sherry clutched her mother's photo tighter. 24 hours ago, she'd been nobody. Now she was the weakness of LA's most dangerous man, hunted by his enemies, her entire life erased in smoke and fire. All because her mother had been brave enough to save a stranger 8 years ago. The compound gates opened ahead, wrought iron, 12 feet high, armed guards nodding as they passed through. Sherry was entering Alfredo Marcello's world now. Her mother's promise of invisibility had shattered like glass. There was no going back to being nobody. The compound was nothing like the mansion where Sherry had scrubbed floors. Inside, Polished concrete reflected track lighting. Modern art hung on white walls. A floating staircase rose to the second level. Everything was clean lines and controlled space. Beautiful, cold, perfect. Troy Harrison met them in the main room, the same man who'd smiled at the entrance. Up close, Sherry noticed the exhaustion in his eyes despite the warm greeting. Got her room ready upstairs. Sarah's waiting. Brief her first, Alfredo said, already moving toward his office. All of it. Troy nodded, then turned to Sherry with a gentleness that seemed out of place among armed men and tension.
Come on.
There's someone you need to meet. He led her down a hallway to a room that looked like a tech hub crossed with a war room. Screens covered one wall, displaying security feeds, data streams, maps marked with red pins. A young woman with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers typed rapidly at a keyboard without looking up. Jane Quinn, Troy said. Our digital eyes and ears. Jane glanced over, offered a quick nod, then returned to her screens. Found 3 more cameras at the mansion. Kitchen, laundry room, staff bathroom. Mauricio's been watching for 7 months, not 6. Sherry's stomach turned. 7 months of her life, surveilled like an insect under glass. Another woman entered, mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, the same professional presence from earlier. I'm Sarah Lo-Duca, she said, her voice carrying an accent Sherry couldn't place. I manage Alfredo's legitimate businesses. Real estate, imports, investments. I also run the operations that matter most. Sarah gestured for Sherry to follow her into an adjacent room. What Sherry saw stopped her cold. An entire wall covered in photographs. Faces, mostly women and children, some barely teenagers. Some photos showed them rescued, thin, bruised, hollow-eyed. Others showed them months later, healthy, smiling, alive. Dates and locations marked each image. Below them, red X's covered other photos, faces of men, all crossed out. 312 victims recovered in 5 years, Sarah said quietly. Trafficking rings across California, Nevada, Arizona. We find them, we get them out, we eliminate the predators running the operations. Sherry stared at the wall, her mind struggling to process the scale. The law won't touch most of these men, Sarah continued. Rich, connected, lawyers who know every loophole. They buy silence, buy judges, buy freedom while girls disappear into shipping containers. Her voice hardened. So, we became the consequence they couldn't buy. You are one of them, Sherry said softly, recognizing the pain behind Sarah's controlled exterior. One of the victims. Sarah nodded. Sold at 16 by my own uncle. Traded across 3 states like cargo. 3 years of hell I wouldn't wish on anyone. She pointed to a photo of a burning warehouse. That's where Alfredo's team found me. They didn't just rescue us. They burned it down with the traffickers locked inside. Sherry's breath caught. Alfredo gave me a choice afterward, Sarah said, meeting her eyes. Hide and heal, or learn to fight and help others. I chose fire. I chose to make sure no one else would suffer what I did. Troy spoke from the doorway. We're not heroes. We've all got blood on our hands. But we have rules. No innocent women, no children, no one who can't fight back. Everyone we target is someone the system released, someone buying their way out of justice. Sherry looked back at the wall of faces. 312 lives saved. She thought of her mother, who'd run into bullets to save one stranger. Now that stranger was saving hundreds. This is what your mother died protecting, Sarah said gently. Not a criminal empire. A war against predators the law won't fight. The 10 men in black suits at her mother's grave suddenly made sense. They weren't just bodyguards. They were soldiers in a shadow war, fighting with Alfredo's resources and Sarah's fury and the determination of people who'd seen evil walk free too many times. Why me? Sherry asked. Why does Maurizio want me dead for this? Because you're Alfredo's weakness, Troy answered. And destroying his anti-trafficking operation means destroying the one person who might make him vulnerable. You. Sherry stood in that room surrounded by rescued faces and crossed-out predators, understanding finally crystallizing. Her mother had saved more than one life 8 years ago. She'd saved the man who would save hundreds more. And now Sherry was standing in the middle of a war she never knew existed. 3 nights into living at the compound, Sherry couldn't sleep. The room was too quiet, too clean, too far removed from the basement quarters where she'd learned to find comfort in small spaces. She wandered downstairs at 2 a.m., drawn by a light spilling from Alfredo's office at the end of the hall. She found him slumped in his desk chair, white shirt soaked crimson on the left side, one tattooed hand pressed against his ribs. Blood seeped between his fingers. Jesus. Sherry moved without thinking, crossing the room in 3 steps. It's nothing. His voice was tight with pain. Don't call anyone. You're bleeding through your shirt. That's not nothing. Can't go to a hospital. Too many questions. Sherry looked at the wound. A deep knife slash across his ribs, still bleeding freely. She thought of her mother, Diane Smith, who'd worked night shifts in the ER and came home with stories Sherry had absorbed like textbooks. Pressure, sterilization, clean sutures. Her hands steadied. Take the shirt off. I'll handle it. Alfredo studied her for a long moment, then complied. The white fabric peeled away sticky with blood, revealing the full scope of his ink-covered torso. Every inch of skin told a story in symbols and script she couldn't yet read. Sherry found a first aid kit in his desk drawer, professional grade, clearly kept for exactly this purpose. She cleaned her hands, snapped on gloves, and began working with the same mechanical precision she'd used scrubbing floors. Pressure to stop bleeding. Betadine to sterilize. Needle and thread to close the gash. Her maid training had taught her to work through anything without flinching. Blood was just another mess to clean. 3 girls, Alfredo said through gritted teeth as she worked. Trafficking house in Riverside. Intel said 4 guards. There were 7. You got them out? All 3. Ages 14, 15, 16. He hissed as the needle pierced skin. One of the guards had a knife. I was too slow. Sherry pulled the suture tight, her hands steady despite his pain. You're fast enough. They're alive. As she worked, her eyes traced the tattoos covering his arms and chest. Names in script. Dates. Symbols that looked like they carried weight she couldn't understand. The neck tattoo she'd noticed at the cemetery was clearly visible now, an intricate design that looked like a rose wrapped in thorns. Each one means something, Alfredo said, following her gaze. Someone saved. Someone lost. Dates I can't forget. Your neck, Sherry said softly, tying off another suture. That one's different. His jaw tightened. My sister. Isabella. She was 16 when they took her. Trafficking ring, same as the ones we hunt now. His voice went raw. I found her 3 months later. Too late. She'd already. He stopped, couldn't finish. I'm sorry. I see her in every girl we rescue, Alfredo continued, staring at nothing. Every scared face. Every broken soul. I'm trying to save her over and over, knowing I never can. Sherry finished the last suture, hands gentle as she cleaned the wound one final time and applied bandaging. The intimacy of the moment settled around them, her hands on his skin, his vulnerability laid bare, their shared understanding of loss that never healed. Your mother, Alfredo said quietly. I saw her in you the moment you shouted at 10 armed men in a cemetery, without flinching. That same fire, that refusal to be invisible even when invisibility was safer. Sherry packed up the first aid kit, avoiding his eyes. I've been invisible my whole life. It's all I know how to be. His tattooed hand caught her wrist, gentle, but firm enough to make her look at him. You're not invisible, Sherry. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You never were. The world just wasn't looking. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not love, not yet, but recognition. 2 people who'd learned to survive by different means, finding themselves in the same war. Sherry pulled her hand back slowly. Get some rest. Those stitches won't hold if you move too much. She left before he could respond, but she felt his gaze following her all the way to the door. The drone arrived at dawn, hovering outside Sherry's window like a mechanical wasp. It dropped a manila envelope on the terrace before disappearing over the Hollywood Hills. Inside were photos, Sherry walking through the compound gardens, sitting by the pool, standing at her bedroom window. All taken from above in the past 3 days. Scrawled across the bottom photo in what looked like dried blood. Maids are easy to replace. Alfredo stood in his office holding the envelope, jaw set like stone. Troy starts training you today. No arguments. Training for what? Survival. By noon, Sherry was in the compound's basement gym, sweating through her 3rd hour of instruction. Troy moved like water, fluid, precise, teaching her how to break a hold, where to strike to disable an attacker, how to handle a weapon without hesitation. Again, he said, patient but firm. Elbow to the throat, knee to the groin, don't stop moving. Sherry tried again, muscles screaming. She'd spent years scrubbing floors, building different strength. This required something else entirely. During a water break, Troy sat across from her, exhaustion showing through his controlled exterior. I've killed 17 people for Alfredo, he said quietly. 16 deserved it, rapists, traffickers, the kind of evil that walks free because they're rich enough to buy justice. Sherry waited, sensing he needed to say this. But the 17th haunts me every night. Troy's hands clenched. 3 years ago. Bad intel. We thought we had the right target, a trafficking coordinator who'd sold girls to a network in Arizona. Kicked in his door at midnight. He reached for something. I fired. And wrong apartment. Wrong man. Just an accountant who'd been robbed twice that month and kept a gun by his bed. Troy's voice cracked. He had a daughter. 8 years old. I made her an orphan over a mistaken address. What did Alfredo do? Helped me disappear the body. Made it look like the guy skipped town. Kept me out of prison. Troy looked at her directly. We do terrible things for good reasons. But at what point do the reasons stop mattering? At what point are we just murderers with better excuses? Sherry had no answer. She thought of her mother, who'd saved lives within the law, and wondered what Diane would think of this shadow justice that saved hundreds but left bodies in its wake. 2 weeks into training, during a late-night session when Sherry was finally starting to feel competent with a weapon, the lights cut out. Emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in red. Troy's hand went to his gun instantly. Stay behind me. Gunfire erupted from the compound's east wing. Shouting in Italian. Glass shattering. Mauricio's men had breached the perimeter. Troy moved toward the sound, Sherry following despite every instinct screaming to hide. They found Sarah in the hallway, cornered by a man twice her size with a knife. She'd been heading to the panic room, caught in the open when they broke through. The attacker lunged. Troy fired, but the gun jammed, a malfunction at the worst possible moment. Sarah went down, the blade slashing toward her throat. Sherry's body moved before her mind caught up. She grabbed the training weapon from her belt, a real gun Troy had given her that afternoon, aimed for center mass the way he'd taught her, and fired twice. The man dropped. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across polished concrete. His eyes stared at nothing. Sherry stood frozen, gun still raised, her hands beginning to shake. The compound security team swarmed in, clearing the area. Troy checked Sarah, alive, shaken, but unharmed. Then he came to Sherry, gently lowering her weapon. Sarah pulled Sherry down to sit against the wall, wrapping an arm around her as the shaking intensified. Now you know the cost, Sarah said softly, holding her through the tremors. The weight that never leaves. The line you can't uncross. Sherry couldn't stop staring at the body, someone who'd been alive 30 seconds ago, now empty because of her. The question is, Sarah continued, her voice gentle but unflinching, are you willing to pay it again? Alfredo woke her before dawn.
Get dressed.
We're going somewhere. The cemetery was empty when they arrived, the Los Angeles skyline just beginning to glow with early morning light. Sherry stood before her mother's grave, and this time she wasn't alone with discount flowers and grief. Alfredo stood beside her, holding a bouquet of red roses that matched the ones he'd placed there the day they met. He knelt and set them carefully next to the simple headstone. "I've come every Sunday for 8 years," he said quietly. Talked to her ghost, asked if I was honoring my promise or breaking it. Sherry watched him, this dangerous man kneeling at her mother's grave like a penitent. The gray sky overhead matched the overcast day captured in her memory of their first meeting at this exact spot. "She told me to let you stay invisible," Alfredo continued, voice breaking in a way Sherry had never heard. "That was the price of saving my life. Keep her daughter out of this world. Let you live normal and safe and forgotten by people like me. But Maurizio found me anyway." "He did." Alfredo stood, turning to face her. "And I keep wondering, maybe invisibility was never safety. Maybe it was just loneliness. Maybe your mother was wrong about what you needed." Sherry thought back to the last real conversation she'd had with Diane before the car accident 3 years ago. Her mother had been different that week, paranoid, jumping at sounds, looking over her shoulder constantly. "Mom told me something the week before she died," Sherry said. "She was scared, though she tried to hide it. Said, saving the wrong life makes you a target forever." I thought she was being dramatic, exhausted from too many ER shifts. She wasn't being dramatic. Alfredo's jaw tightened. Maurizio was hunting her. For 3 years after she saved me, he tried to eliminate the witness who could identify his paid cops. The car accident wasn't an accident. The truth settled like ice in Sherry's chest. Her mother hadn't died from bad breaks. She'd been murdered for being brave enough to save a stranger. "My mother saved you so you could save others," Sherry whispered, tears finally breaking free. 312 victims because she locked those ER doors and refused to let you die. Maybe she saved me too, by leading me here." Alfredo stepped closer, his tattooed hand gentle as he wiped a tear from her cheek. "You're not invisible anymore, Sherry. Not to me." She didn't know who moved first. Maybe neither of them did. But suddenly his lips were on hers, one hand cradling her face, the other at her waist pulling her close. She tasted salt from her tears and something darker, coffee, violence, the weight of choices neither of them could unmake. They kissed against her mother's gravestone with the LA skyline bearing witness, a moment of beauty carved from a life of violence. When they pulled apart, Sherry kept her forehead pressed to his. "I killed someone last week. I can still see his eyes. I know. And I'd do it again to protect Sarah. To protect you. To protect the people you save." "I know that too." Over the following weeks, they fell into something neither had words for. Love felt too simple a term for what grew between them. Stolen moments between raids, his tattooed hands gentle despite their violence, teaching her to see beauty in a world built on blood. Her presence softening the edges of his darkness, making him laugh in ways Troy said he hadn't heard in years. Late nights when nightmares woke them both, finding each other in the dark. Early mornings training together, her body learning to fight while her heart learned to trust. Quiet dinners where they talked about mothers who'd sacrificed everything and futures that felt impossible but necessary. Sherry Smith was no longer invisible. She'd become the weakness of LA's most dangerous man. And somehow, impossibly, she'd also become his strength. Jane found the anomalies on a Tuesday. Security logs that didn't match guard rotations. Encrypted communications pinging from inside the compound at odd hours. Someone was feeding information to Maurizio, and they'd been careful enough to almost get away with it. "Lock it down," Alfredo ordered. "No one in or out until we find the leak." 3 nights later, Sherry couldn't sleep. The weight of the man she'd killed still pressed on her chest at odd hours, making rest impossible. She wandered downstairs to the kitchen, thinking tea might help, when she heard a voice drifting from the west corridor. "Shipping containers at the port of Los Angeles. Thursday at 3 a.m. 12 victims, maybe more." Sherry froze. That was the raid Alfredo had briefed them on yesterday. Classified information only 5 people knew. She moved closer, recognizing the voice now. John Costner, one of Alfredo's most trusted lieutenants. A man who'd been with him for 7 years. "Yes, I'm sure. Troy's leading the team. Alfredo's staying back to protect the Sherry's hand slipped, knocking a decorative glass from a hallway table. It shattered against marble flooring, the sound exploding through the quiet compound like a gunshot. John spun, phone still in hand, and their eyes met. His face shifted from shock to something desperate and dangerous. He ended the call and pulled a weapon from his waistband in one smooth motion. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I can't let you tell him." Sherry ran. She'd learned the compound's layout during training, every exit, every corner, every place to hide or fight. But John knew it better. His footsteps pounded behind her as she sprinted toward the main wing, toward Alfredo's office, toward help. "Alfredo!" Her scream tore through the compound. "Troy! Someone!" A door burst open ahead. Alfredo emerged already armed, Troy right behind him. They took in the scene instantly, Sherry running, John chasing with drawn weapon, and moved like the machine they were. Troy cut off John's escape while Alfredo positioned himself between the threat and Sherry. Within 30 seconds, they had John cornered in the armory, disarmed and on his knees. "Talk," Alfredo said, voice colder than Sherry had ever heard it. "Before I decide you're not worth the bullet." John's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he looked up at the man he'd betrayed. "He has my son. Maurizio has Liam." The room went silent. 6 months ago, Liam didn't come home from school. Next day I got a video, my boy tied to a chair, beaten, begging me to help him. John's voice shattered. Maurizio said if I fed him information, Liam would stay alive. If I refused, he'd send me pieces. 2 of our operatives died last month, Troy said quietly, because someone leaked their location. "I know," John sobbed. "I know what I've done. But he's my son. He's only 17. What would you do?" Alfredo raised his weapon, pointing it at John's head. His tattooed hand steady, his expression carved from stone. This was the mob boss Sherry had heard whispered about. Ruthless, unforgiving. The kind of man who survived by eliminating threats without hesitation. "Alfredo, wait." Sherry stepped forward, hand on his arm. "He betrayed us. People died. His son is innocent." Sherry held his gaze. "You would do anything for the people you love." "So would he. You told me you see your sister in every victim you save. He sees his son in those torture videos." "Justice demands. Mercy defines you," Sherry said firmly. "That's what separates you from Maurizio." The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. Troy watched, hand on his own weapon, waiting to follow whatever order came next. Finally, Alfredo lowered the gun. "We get the boy back," he said, voice still hard but decision made. "Then you leave. Both of you. Disappear. Change your names. And if I ever see you again, mercy won't save you twice." John collapsed forward, sobbing his gratitude into the floor. Sherry had just saved a traitor's life. But more importantly, she'd saved Alfredo's soul. Jane's intel pinpointed Liam's location, a warehouse complex at the port of Los Angeles, heavily guarded, cameras on every corner. Alfredo planned the operation with military precision. 8 men, 3 extraction points, diversionary tactics to split Mauricio's forces. "I'm coming with you," Sherry said. "Absolutely not. I'm a maid." She met his eyes without flinching. "I can walk through buildings without anyone noticing I'm there. I've spent my entire life being invisible to people who should have seen me. Let me use it." Alfredo wanted to refuse. She saw it in the tension of his jaw, the way his tattooed hands clenched. But Troy spoke up from across the war room. "She's right. Security won't look twice at cleaning staff. We need every advantage." Against every instinct, Alfredo agreed. 2 nights later, Sherry walked through the port complex's main gate, wearing a cleaning company uniform Sarah had procured, carrying supplies and a stolen employee badge. Security waved her through without a second glance. To men like them, cleaning staff were furniture. She'd spent her whole life hating that invisibility. Tonight, she weaponized it. The warehouse Jane had identified sat near the container yards. Sherry entered through a service door, pushing a cart, eyes down like she'd done 1,000 times in the Beverly Hills mansion. Guards passed her in the hallway. None looked at her face. She found the shipping containers in the back warehouse, modified with ventilation and locks, converted into human cages. Her mother's photo was tucked inside her shirt, pressed against her heart for courage. The third container was locked with a digital keypad. Sherry used the bypass code Jane had extracted from hacked security systems. The lock clicked open. Inside, 7 faces looked up at her. Teenagers, thin, bruised, terrified. A boy with John Costner's eyes sat in the corner, one arm clearly broken. "Liam?" Sherry whispered. He nodded, too scared to speak. "I'm getting you out. All of you. Can you walk?" They could.
Barely.
Sherry led them through the maintenance tunnel Jane had mapped, a service corridor used for waste removal that connected to the port's drainage system. Behind them, gunfire erupted. Alfredo's team engaging Mauricio's guards right on schedule, pulling attention away from the extraction. They were 50 feet from the tunnel exit when Sergio Boni stepped into their path. Mauricio's second-in-command, the man Sarah had mentioned killed 3 of their operatives last year. He looked at Sherry, recognition flashing across his face from the surveillance photos Mauricio had collected. "The Maid," he said, raising his weapon and reaching for his radio. "Boss is going to love this." A single shot cracked through the tunnel. Sergio dropped, a perfect hole through his temple. Sarah Lo Duca emerged from the shadows, weapon still raised, her face emotionless. "Keep moving." They got all 7 victims out through the drainage system to the extraction vehicles waiting a quarter-mile away. Paramedics from Alfredo's network stabilized Liam's arm. The other teenagers, 3 girls, 3 boys, all stolen for trafficking, huddled in blankets, alive because Sherry had walked through that warehouse like she didn't exist. In the SUV afterward, Alfredo pulled her close, his tattooed arms wrapped around her shaking frame. "You were incredible." "I was invisible," Sherry corrected. "Like always."
No.
He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You were exactly who they needed you to be. That's not invisibility. That's power." But the cost was clear. Maurizio now knew Sherry wasn't just a weakness to exploit. She was an active threat to his empire. A maid who'd infiltrated his operation and stolen 7 revenue streams from his trafficking network. The war had just become personal. Sherry Smith was no longer hiding in corners. She was fighting beside the man her mother had saved, using the skills that came from years of being overlooked. She'd transformed from victim to warrior without realizing when the change had happened. The message arrived on a burner phone left at the compound gates. A single text, 20 children. Location for a meeting. Downtown LA, Grand Park, noon tomorrow. Alfredo comes alone, or they die. Jane verified the intelligence, a trafficking ring holding minors in a warehouse near San Pedro. The information was real. The trap was obvious. "I'm going," Alfredo said. "Not alone." Sherry's voice cut through the war room. "My mother died because she saved you alone. I won't lose you the same way." "Sherry, I'm not asking permission." They drove into downtown LA at 11:45 a.m., Alfredo's 10-man security team in formation around them. The same men in black suits who'd stood at her mother's grave now surrounded her in tactical formation, weapons concealed but ready. Troy sat in the lead vehicle, communicating with Jane, who monitored traffic cameras from the compound. Grand Park stretched beneath the towering skyscrapers of the LA skyline, the same view that had loomed behind them at the cemetery that first day. Civilians walked through, oblivious to the violence about to unfold in broad daylight. Alfredo's jaw was set, his tattooed hand steady. But Sherry saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned rooftops and vehicles with the awareness of someone expecting death. "If this goes wrong," he started. "It won't." At exactly noon, the world exploded. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 rooftops simultaneously. Snipers Maurizio had positioned during the night, hidden among maintenance crews. 2 of Alfredo's men dropped before they could take cover. Armed vehicles screeched into the plaza from 4 directions, blocking every exit. Civilians screamed and scattered. Gunfire ripped through the afternoon air. Troy's voice crackled over comms. It's a full assault, 20 hostiles, maybe more. We need to fall back. A delivery van slammed into their SUV at 40 miles per hour, T-boning the passenger side where Sherry sat. Metal shrieked. Glass shattered. The world spun sideways. Sherry's head cracked against the window. Blood filled her mouth. Through blurred vision, she saw the van's side door slide open, saw men in tactical gear pouring out. Alfredo was pinned in his seat, like trapped by crushed metal, shouting her name. He fired at the approaching men, but there were too many, the angle was wrong, and she was already being dragged from the wreckage. Hands grabbed her, rough, violent, pulling her across broken glass. She tried to fight, tried to use Troy's training, but her vision swam and her body wouldn't respond correctly. A fist connected with her temple. Then another. The world dimmed. The last thing she saw was Alfredo's face, those dark eyes wide with something she'd never seen before. Terror. Raw. Absolute terror. He was screaming her name, fighting to free himself from the wreckage while bullets pinned him down, forced to watch as Mauricio's men threw her into the van. Then darkness. When the firefight ended 3 minutes later, 6 civilians were wounded. Troy Harrison lay dead along with 3 other members of Alfredo's security team, and the plaza looked like a war zone. Alfredo finally tore himself free from the destroyed SUV, blood streaming from a dozen cuts, his leg likely broken. But he didn't care about his injuries. He stumbled forward, dropped to his knees in the debris field of glass and shell casings. Scattered around him were the flowers Sherry had been carrying, cheap discount blooms she'd bought that morning to place at her mother's grave after the meeting. Petals mixed with blood on concrete. She was gone, taken by the man who'd killed her mother. And Alfredo Marcelo, who'd saved 312 victims over 8 years, had failed to protect the one person who mattered most. Sherry woke to the smell of rust and ocean salt. Her head throbbed where they'd beaten her. When her vision cleared, she found herself zip-tied to a metal chair in a warehouse that stank of diesel and decay. 3 men stood in a semicircle before her. Carmine Costa, Giorgio Toscani, Geraldino Sal, names Jane had shown her on enemy dossiers. And at the center, Maurizio Davide himself. He was older than she'd imagined. 50s, silver hair, expensive suit that looked wrong in a place like this. He smiled when he saw her eyes open. "The maid who became a soldier," he said. "Your mother would be so proud." "Don't talk about my mother." "Why not? I knew Diane Smith quite well. Spent 3 years planning her death." He pulled up a chair, sat facing her like they were having coffee. "The assassination attempt 8 years ago, that was meant to eliminate Alfredo before he could build his anti-trafficking crusade. Bad for business, you understand. But your mother survived saving him, which made her a witness. A problem." Sherry's blood went cold. Cut brake lines disguised as mechanical failure. "Took me 3 years to find the right mechanic, the right opportunity." Mauricio's smile widened. "Your mother took 8 bullets across 3 years. She just didn't know I was firing them." Rage flooded through her, hot, pure, clearing the fog from her concussed brain. "Now," Maurizio continued, standing, "you're going to tell me about Alfredo's safe houses. The locations of victims he's rescued. Every operation he's planning." "Go to hell." The first blow split her lip. The second cracked a rib. By the 5th, Sherry had retreated into her mother's medical training, controlling her breathing to slow blood loss, staying conscious through sheer will, cataloging injuries with clinical detachment. When Maurizio pulled out pliers, Sherry dislocated her thumb the way Troy had taught her, slipping the zip tie while screaming to cover the movement. When the pain became unbearable, she pressed specific points on her neck, a technique Diane had mentioned once that could temporarily slow her heart to near-death levels. She dropped limp. Maurizio checked her pulse, found it barely there, and cursed. "Get her down. If she dies before Alfredo arrives, this was all for nothing." They cut her restraints. The moment they turned away, Sherry's eyes snapped open. She grabbed a broken chair leg, with splintered sharp, and drove it through the nearest guard's throat. The second guard reached for his weapon. She took it from him and fired once. Then she climbed into the warehouse rafters and waited. Alfredo arrived 30 minutes later carrying a briefcase, walking through the warehouse door alone as instructed. Sherry saw the trap immediately. 3 snipers positioned in the catwalks, weapons aimed at the entrance. Maurizio stepped into view. The great Alfredo Marcello, finally on his knees for a woman. Let her go. You have the money. I have something better. Your corpse. The snipers raised their rifles. Sherry dropped from the rafters directly onto Maurizio, 20 feet of freefall concentrated into her mother's surgical precision. Her fingers found his neck, the exact spot Diane had shown her years ago while explaining anatomy, and struck with everything she had. The femoral artery severed. Blood sprayed. Gunfire erupted. But this time it came from outside. Sarah and Jane's team storming the warehouse, following the tracker Jane had secretly sewn into Sherry's clothes. The snipers fell. Mauricio's men scattered. Sherry knelt beside Maurizio as he bled out on concrete, her face inches from his. My mother saved a life 8 years ago. I just balanced the scales. His eyes went dark. Later, Jane would download evidence from Mauricio's servers, names of corrupt officials, trafficking routes, financial records. Dozens of arrests would follow. The network would collapse. But in that moment, Sherry only felt Alfredo's arms around her, pulling her close, both of them covered in blood and broken but alive. I've got you, he whispered. And for the first time since her mother died, Sherry believed someone finally did. 2 years later, Sherry stood at her mother's grave beneath the same Los Angeles skyline that had witnessed everything. But the woman standing there now bore little resemblance to the frightened maid who'd once clutched discount flowers and confronted armed strangers. She wore an elegant navy dress, her hair styled professionally, a simple gold band on her left hand catching the morning light. Beside her stood Alfredo Marcello, no longer just the tattooed Mafia boss who'd terrified her, but her husband. The grave was covered in red roses. Dozens of them, expensive and fresh, no more wilted discount bouquets from corner markets. 10 men in black suits stood behind them in formation, the same protective stance they'd held that first day. But now when Sherry looked at them, she didn't see threats. She saw family, guardians of something that had transformed from violence into redemption. Sarah Lowe Dukas stood to Sherry's left, no longer just a survivor but co-director of the Diane Smith Foundation. Together they'd built something Diane would have been proud of, an organization that rescued trafficking victims and gave them what the law wouldn't: safety, education, housing, healing, and the chance to rebuild shattered lives. 347 victims in 2 years, Sarah said softly. Safe houses in 8 cities across California. 23 traffickers eliminated or arrested. Your mother's legacy multiplied. Jane had compiled the statistics last week during their board meeting. Numbers that represented real lives. Teenagers who'd been stolen and were now in college. Children reunited with families. Women learning to trust again after unimaginable trauma. Sherry placed her hand on her stomach, 6 months pregnant with the life growing inside her. The baby kicked, as if responding to being this close to the grandmother she'd never meet. Hi, Mom, Sherry said quietly. I need to tell you some things. Alfredo's tattooed hand covered hers on her stomach, warm and solid. He said nothing, just stood beside her while she found the words. You taught me that one act of courage can change everything. You crawled through bullets to save Isabella Castellano. You locked those ER doors and pulled 3 bullets from a stranger's chest while his enemies tried to kill you both. You saved a man everyone called a monster. The wind scattered rose petals across the headstone. But you didn't save a monster, Mom. You saved a man who would save hundreds more. You gave him a reason to build something better than the darkness he came from. Sherry's voice strengthened. And you saved me too, by showing me that being invisible was never about safety, it was about fear. She thought of the basement room where she'd hidden from the world. The Maid uniform she'd worn like armor against being seen. The years spent apologizing for existing. I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not invisible. And neither are the people we save. The girls who walk through our safe houses learning they matter. The boys who discover they're worth protecting. The the victims who become survivors who become warriors. Alfredo pulled her closer. The man whose hands had taken lives now cradled the life they'd created together, a future built from ashes and choices and the stubborn belief that even darkness could birth light. Behind them, the 10 men who'd once surrounded this grave as strangers now stood as family. Some were former soldiers like Troy would have been had he survived. Others were rescued victims like Sarah, who'd chosen fire over hiding. All of them guardians of an empire transformed from violence into purpose. The LA skyline watched from the distance, indifferent and eternal. But here, in this cemetery where everything had changed 2 years ago, Sherry Marcello now, had proven something her mother had always known. One act of courage could change everything. One life saved could save hundreds more. And love could bloom even in the darkest soil, growing like roses on a grave, beautiful and fierce and absolutely unbreakable. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and be part of a community that cherishes unforgettable tales like this one. Your support means more than you know. It fuels the creation of even more stories that speak to the heart. So, whether you're watching from your TV or your phone, take a moment to join us. Every like, every subscription, every share helps us continue bringing these stories to life. Thank you for being a part of this journey.